So if your dynasty leagues are set up correctly, you're going to have a taxi squad. I have a couple guys that I call taxi squad stashes. That's a tongue twister. Also sleepers, whatever you want to call them. Like last year, the one guy that I targeted in most of my dynasty leagues was Chase Brown. You know he's not going to be starting. He's third on the depth chart, but he has a lot of potential. Not good enough to make your roster, not even a flex spot. So you put him in your taxi squad and you hope that something good happens. And then fast forward to this year, he's on my list of trade targets. He's still on my roster, and in my opinion, there's a good chance that he could take over that backfield just because of the all-around talent he has. So if you have the room, I have a couple guys that I'm looking at in the later rounds that I could possibly sit in the taxi squad, let them cook for a little, and maybe next year they move up to the roster. At quarterback, it's real simple. I mean, you're going to have to take a real flyer. The only guy that I think is probably a taxi squad sleeper is Joe Milton. If for some reason Drake May stumbles and Joe Milton gets a chance, you saw at the combine that there was a lot of raw talent that I think he could have been a competitor to a possible starter. Maybe not this year, next year on another team, but he's still, if I got the room and he's there and I don't like any of the other guys, I'll throw Joe Milton in my taxi squad. Like I said, quarterback's a real shallow class, but as far as like a running back, there's three guys that I like that I think if I have them, I'm going to stick them in the taxi squad, and maybe with an injury, they might move into the roster, but if not, maybe next year they'll move into the roster. First one is Will Shipley out of Clemson going into Philadelphia. He's backing up Saquon Barkley. I think he has more talent than Kenneth Gainwell. I think he has a real chance to move into the number 2 spot through preseason and at some point in the season. Barkley's injury prone. Now, granted, in Philadelphia, he's running behind a much better offensive line than he has in his career, so he's not going to probably take some of the hits that he took, but if he does get injured, I think Will Shipley is going to be the number 2 on that team by the end of the year. And depending how he shows out, he might be worthy of a flex even without an injury to Saquon, depending on how the Eagles' offense works. Another guy I like, same division, Tyrone Tracy Jr. in the Giants. I think he's slept on. I think he's drafted way too late in a lot of leagues. I don't think there's any question that he could potentially take over that backfield down the road. They have Devin Singletary, who is a serviceable back. He's been good. He's never gotten over that threshold of being one of those must-have running backs. So I think if there's a door to be opened, it's going to be in New York for Tyrone to possibly have at least a committee. But again, stick him on your taxi squad. If he sits there all year, great. If he sits there for 8 weeks and all of a sudden you realize he's a flex play or you lose people to injury, a good little stash. The biggest reach, and it's probably a name reach, is Frank Gore Jr. Went undrafted, went to Buffalo. They already have Cook. They also drafted another running back, but he's one of those guys that just because of the name, I think you want to sit on. Do I think he has the clearest path? No, but I do think that there's a lot of potential there. I'm actually surprised he went undrafted, but either way, stick him on your taxi squad if you got him. Moving on to wide receivers. Again, there's a lot of wide receivers in the draft. I think a lot of wide receivers are going earlier than they should, and there's a lot of questionable talent. So these guys are guys that are probably sitting there in the 4th round. First one, actually going to go to Philly again with Johnny Wilson. Now, with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith sitting there, he's not going to be a top 2 guy unless they move, get hurt, or whatever. But the way Philly moves the ball, there's a lot of opportunity in that offense if they get back to what they were 2 years ago. The one thing that I like about him is now Devontae Parker is retiring, so he could very easily move into the number 3 spot. And as you've seen, in any given week, a number 3 spot in Philly could be a guy that gets you points. So if you have the room, you're looking who to draft, pick up Johnny Wilson, throw him on your taxi. It's 2 other guys I like there. Let's start with Jalen McMillan going to Tampa Bay. Along with Trey Palmer, those are 2 guys that I would look at as low buy trade targets. I'm going to have an episode coming out about that stuff, but it's a stash spot. Mike Evans is going into his 11th season. Godwin is going into his 8th. So that offense is getting older. They're going to be looking for some young guys to come up. So if you can stash a guy like Jalen McMillan and he shows that he's got some talent, you could be sitting him on your bench, on your taxi squad this year. Next year, he can move in and be a flex play, depending what happens with Mike Evans, depending where that offense goes. The offense showed you behind Baker, they're pretty efficient offense, and you don't know what they're going to do with quarterback. They may stay with Baker. Either way, a young guy with older guys ahead of him that are going to be moving on or retiring soon, so he's a good little stash if you can get him. Another one, kind of the same scenario, but an offense that likes to move the ball and get a lot of plays in. Malik Washington in Miami. He at Virginia, he led the country. I think he led the country with 110 receptions. He's really good in open space. He's not a playmaker like Tyreek, and he can't get open like Tyreek, and not quite the route running of Jalen Waddle, but another guy that's fast, good in open space, and the way that Miami moves the ball, plays, and the amount of plays that they get off in any given week is a good stat. Again, a good stash. Like I said, none of these guys are guys that you're going to be putting in your flex or in your roster right away, but they're guys that you can sit on. And depending, some taxi squads are 1 year, some taxi squads are 2 years. So these are guys that you could sit and let develop. And everybody on this list, I would think, with the exception of Joe Milton, I think everybody on this list within 2 years has a definite shot of being a wide receiver 2, or at least a flex play wide receiver 3 on the team that they're currently on, standing as is. Either way, so at wide receiver, Johnny Wilson, Jalen McMillan, Malik Washington, 3 guys I like as taxi squad stashes. I got to figure out a new way to say that. That's horrible. Running back, Tyrone Tracy Jr., Frank Gore Jr., and Will Shipley. At tight end, I like 2 guys. I like Theo Johnson out of Penn State. I like him in New York for this reason. Darren Waller is already contemplating retirement. He's on his way out. They don't have anybody else. Well, actually, they have Bellinger, but he's 6'6", 264 pounds, and runs a 4.57. So that is a big, fast tight end that if he's open in the end zone, or even close to open in the end zone, Daniel Jones or any quarterback is going to love him. And with their way their run game is, they don't have the bruiser. Like, they lost Saquon for those goal line touches. They're going to still give it to Singletary. But you got a 6'6" tight end running across the back of the end zone. You know that ball is going to go to him 50% of the time. And if Darren Waller retires, Theo Johnson gets a shot. I think he'll beat out Bellinger and be the number 1 tight end on that team come the end of the year or by next year. The other tight end I have is Eric All. He fell into a beautiful spot in Cincinnati. I think he was taken in the 3rd round. And the funny thing about Cincinnati is they do not have a true number 1 tight end. That locker room is wide open for a guy like Eric All to come in and take over, be the number 1 tight end, have Joe Burrow throwing the ball to him. They haven't had a real tight end in a couple years that was like a set and forget tight end, or a tight end that they could really rely on. I think they got Mike Gesicki as their number 1 tight end, but he's more of a blocking tight end. So if Eric All comes in and shows any type of talent with hands, he's one of those guys you could pick up late. He's actually undrafted in a lot of 4-round rookie drafts, 10-team. Obviously your deeper leagues or your 5-round rookie drafts, he might go, but he's sitting on most waivers right now, so he's a great pickup. If you pick him up and put him in your taxi, he might become your number 2 tight end within a couple weeks, heck, even by the end of preseason. Either way, these are some sleepers, some stashes, some taxi squad stuff. None of these guys I expect to be on your starting roster week 1, but I do expect some of them to make it there by the end of the season and be on your starting rosters by next year. I got some must-have pickups, some trade targets, trade sells, and some all-around trade advice coming up, like how to tell the difference between Dynasty and redraft value of players, because that is the hardest thing for people, especially people new to Dynasty. Either way, booze and balling, giving you a little bit of advice. Take it, leave it, comment, don't care, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bukanuga.